All right, so thank you for coming. I'm going to dim the lights a little bit so the slides are a little easier to read. Hope this isn't a problem for anyone. All right, so my name is Jorbin, and I'm going to be talking about the lessons I've learned from making millions of websites more accessible. I work on a product called Add This. We're a little orange sharing widget that you've probably seen around the internet. We are on 14 million domains. We see 1.3 billion users every month. So we, have an impact, and when we, make our stuff more accessible, it helps many, many websites. So to start, we need to ask ourselves, what is accessibility? And so I'm using this quote from the W3C to define it, mainly that accessibility supports social inclusion for people with disabilities as well as others, such as older people, people in rural areas, and people in developing countries. That's something that's important for people to understand, is that accessibility is not about making a site more usable for someone that has a visual impairment, such as being blind. It's about many things. It's about really opening up your website and your product towards more people, towards everyone. And I asked on Twitter the other day, what's one thing that every developer needs to realize about accessibility? And the first one is that it's often the decisions made before a line of code is written that impact accessibility the most. Something that's important and something you'll see over these next few slides. The next one is that keyboard accessibility is a good sell. Power users don't like to use the mouse. Many accessible technology users can't. So the keyboard really is, what often is used for accessibility purposes. It's probably the most used assistive technology in computing. So what do I mean by assistive technology? Assistive technology is any sort of piece of technology that make it easier for people to use something else. The most common that people think of is a screen reader. What a screen reader does is literally reads out the content that's on a page to the people looking at it. But assistive technologies come in many, many forms. Glasses that I wear, for example. Someone using earbuds in order to listen to a site. Braille. A magnifying glass. These are all forms of assistive technologies. But not all problems can be solved with assistive technology. For example, color blindness. This, which the colors are not great on the projector, but is what's known as an Ishihara test. And what it does is it tries to detect if someone is colorblind or not. This test looks or displays the number 42 in a very not easy to read manner, and an impossible to read manner if you happen to suffer from protopania, which I probably just butchered the pronunciation of that. So I'm going to talk about accessibility mainly for three types of people: product owners, designers, and developers. So product owners are the people that, you own a website, you produce the content for it, you really own, what you are finally producing. And the first thing you need to do is understand your responsibilities. You may actually have a legal requirement that, decides a certain level of accessibility that you need to maintain. You may have contractual obligations. If you have a contract with your users that says anyone can use this, or we will support these versions of screen readers or other things, then it's very important for you to understand what your responsibilities are before you even begin defining what your product is going to be. Prioritizing accessibility, though, has many additional benefits. We think about I need to make it usable for someone that is deaf. And, that has many other benefits. So one way to assist a deaf user is to have a script for your videos. That also has the additional benefit of improving your search engine optimization for that videos, because now the content of that videos is more machine readable, and thus, Google will know what you said. So these SEO benefits. Also, a lot of making a site usable for a screen reader involves just writing clean, semantic, good, well-written code. And this has, some amazing SEO benefits. Anyone that's ever written that spaghetti code that, doesn't format HTML correctly, knows that by formatting correctly, you improve your SEO. It also increases your device independence. So by enabling a greater degree of devices to work, by default you're going to be helping out mobile phones. Mobile phones we generally think of as smartphones when we produce a site, but it's often much more than smartphones. I mean, if you have anything aimed at the developing world, you have to have support for some of the worst browsers that exist. I mean, some of these browsers on older mobile phones make you dream of the days of IE6 development. It also creates a more inclusive work environment. By allowing your product to be used by everyone, people are going to feel more included inside your work environment. You're going to make employees happier. You'll often not know that you actually have employees that might have disabilities, that you might not even be open and upfront about it. We at this, produced something and, found out that one of my coworkers is colorblind, and, it never came up until, he couldn't understand a Photoshop document, showing off a new design. And so by learning that, by focusing on that, you actually create a more inclusive work environment. So designers have a big task when it comes to accessibility. Designers have to make sure that their design, not only is usable for people that are using a computer traditionally with a mouse and keyboard, but that are using it in other ways as well, or that might not be able to experience every aspect of a website. If you autoplay music, or autoplay some audio when the page loads, and it makes some sort of announcement like, click this red button if you want to, win $1,000. And that's a horrible thing, and please don't ever do that on your website. But, like, you're now blocked out two different groups of users from actually being able to experience that. By, playing the audio and only doing it in audio, people that have hearing problems might miss that. Also, people that have their sound off are going to miss that. And by saying, click the red button, you're, not everyone is going to see a button and be able to decipher that that's red, or what red means. So the biggest thing that designers should focus on is color contrast, is making sure that the foreground color and the background color, don't or have enough of a contrast. There's actually a mathematical formula, and all my slides are on GitHub already, and I'll send tweet out a link afterwards, so you can check them out and actually see this formula. But for figuring out if your colors are actually have good contrast, there's also plenty of tools available, and I'll show you those at the end that'll help you with that as well. So like I said, click the red button is probably the worst thing that you can put on a site if you actually want to make sure that a colorblind user can fully experience your site. So check your colors. Checking your colors is as simple as using a program. There's one called Contrast A, which Adobe puts out, that will allow you to put in two color combinations and see the contrast between them, both for full-sighted people and for people with the 7 most popular or most common types of color blindness. So always make sure you check your colors. And at this, we screwed this up once. And so for example, you see here, a orange and a green. For a normal sighted user, this is very easy to differentiate. But if you suffer from, sorry I screw up the pronunciation of this, protopenia, which is the most common type of color blindness, you actually see this, which is a dark shade of yellow and a mustard shade of yellow, but two pretty close, especially really close when looking at the graph. Very little contrast between those two, and thus hard to decipher. So just by switching from this orange and green to orange and blue, now there's much more contrast. So by making slight design choices, by checking your colors, you're actually able to make your product more usable for more people. Caption your videos. This is an incredibly important thing. If you're producing video content and putting video content on your website, if you're not making it available for people that aren't able to listen or don't want to listen, you're losing out on a group of people that could be converting and could be doing whatever you're trying to drive from your website. And as I mentioned before, captioning also enables you to get SEO benefits. So developers, and I primarily serve as a developer, so I end up knowing a little bit about this. The first thing that I definitely encourage any developer to do is use a screen reader. Try one out. Listen to your website. It will open your eyes to listen to it. You'll really be able to hear, how your site flows. So what are the standards and specs that you should care about? Because there's a lot of standards and specs related to accessibility, and they're all pretty important. The first one is HTML. Writing good semantic HTML has tremendous accessibility benefits. You should always write good HTML. I definitely encourage people to read the HTML spec. It's now a living spec, so it's going to change often, but it's very beneficial and very good thing to read. Next one is WAI-ARIA, the Web Accessibility Initiative's ARIA is accessible rich internet applications. This provides a number of really nice markups that you can add to your HTML to really define things on the page. So WordPress uses this for the admin menu. There's an ARIA attribute called has pop-up, which basically will tell a screen reader that that this link will cause something, new content to pop up. Generally, just defines, could be a more like traditional pop-up. In the case of the admin menus, it's the flyouts, but those work. And by doing this, it actually helps people understand, there's a sub-menu under here. If I click this link, I will get a sub-menu. The next one is WCAG 2.0, which is the Web Content Authoring Guidelines. And what these do is define the accessibility specs for people that are actually writing authoring tools, like WordPress. So if you're contributing to WordPress, these are definitely a very good thing for you to read. I screwed that up, that's the next one. These are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Sorry about that. So these are actually like the best specs out there, in my opinion, for making accessible websites. This 2.0 is still technically in draft, which if you follow W3C at all, it takes forever for things to actually get published. And these define 3 different levels, A, AA, and AAA, for how well things are supported. And it sets different guidelines for each of them. So for example, captioning a video is a AA guideline. Providing both captioning and sign language for a video is a AAA guideline. In many cases, you don't necessarily, like AAAs are hard to obtain, in many ways on purpose. I generally aim for AA requirements. AA requirements are not going to be a whole lot of additional work, but are going to give you a whole lot of benefits for how people can use your site. The authoring tool accessibility guidelines, as I mentioned, define the specs for the content creation tools like WordPress. So if you are building WordPress plugins, these are definitely guidelines that you should be checking out. 508 is the final one, and this is Section 508 of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and this sets the U.S. federal government's guidelines for accessibility. In my eyes, these are a little bit outdated. However, they still, are the law, and if you are, dealing with the federal government, this is something that you should familiarize yourself with. So I have what I call in my office Jorbin's 3 laws for accessibility, and the first one is if it has hover style, it needs focus style. If you have ever tried to keyboard nav your way through a site and you don't have focus styling, then you don't know where your keyboard is actually looking. The second one is if it has an anchor tag, if it's an anchor tag, it needs an href. Otherwise, most browsers won't actually focus on it. And the final one is that if the HTML isn't in the order that is logical and is how things get displayed, you're going to want to shoot yourself making it accessible. It is very time-consuming and very challenging to do something like tap jacking, where you're actually trying to change the behavior of the browser to make something more accessible. You're going to end up hurting yourself and hurting the accessibility, which thus hurts the users if you try to do something like this. So it's best to really make sure your HTML stays as much in order as possible. So when you're doing accessibility, you have to make a number of decisions. And a lot of these are things that I've learned through our time focusing on accessibility at this. The first one is that accessibility starts with usability. If something's not usable, then it doesn't matter how accessible it is. If someone tries to tab their way through and can't, like if you're doing something to block them from using tab, you're hurting usability. So it's really important in step one in any sort of accessibility program should really be make it usable. If it's not usable, you fail. Next is to aim for an appropriate level of support. As I mentioned, some of the AAA guidelines or requirements are, in my opinion, over the top, ridiculous, and you're not it's not worth the time to try to follow them. They're good, lofty goals, but it's much better to aim for an appropriate level of support. Sometimes you're going to have a page that's maybe incredibly under traffic that you just decide it's not worth your time and effort to make that more accessible. It's much you have to aim for what's going to actually get you the biggest bang for your buck and what's really going to help the most users in the shortest amount of time. This next one is incredibly important in that it shouldn't be one person owning accessibility that, oh, well, we finished coding this web page, we'll hand it off to Joe, and Joe will make it accessible. It's really important that the entire team own accessibility and be involved in discussing and doing accessibility from the very beginning. It's something that's really benefited us. We've actually created a culture where when we start to design products, we actually, we'll bring up in our meetings, how do we make sure this is accessible? How do we make sure that everyone is able to use it? And it leads to a lot less problems later on. Going back and making something accessible is much, much harder than actually going at it from the beginning. The next, include people with disabilities in your usability research. It was incredibly eye-opening to watch a person use a screen reader on my website. I can use a screen reader, and but I'm definitely not what anyone would consider a power user with it. I don't use it on a regular basis, and it's really something you have to get used to doing. And by actually having a person that uses it on a regular basis, by being able to watch them, I was able to see 10 problems within 5 minutes and 10 things that I could do, small things that make it better. So I strongly encourage this. This link down here will tell you more about how to recruit people with disabilities, where you can reach out to different groups to find people to help you. There's a whole bunch of tools out there, and I just want to run through some of them. First one, the Chrome team put out a good series of extensions on how to make things more accessible. A whole bunch of cool testing tools that'll help you. FireEye, this is a Firefox plugin. It's actually the only reason I still have Firefox installed other than for testing purposes. This will give you, some good, simple automated reports on accessibility for your page. It'll highlight areas where color contrast is off. It will, just show you general errors in your HTML. If you're missing an alt tag for an image, things like that. Really, definitely recommend it. This is a new iOS app that I saw yesterday that allows you to, looking through your camera phone, see how the world is if you have different types of color blindness. Really just, if you understand it, it's a lot easier to fix it. Similarly, for the Mac, there's sim daltonism, which allows you to have your screen become different types of color blindness that you want. And so you can really simulate what it's like to have this problem. Contrast A, as I mentioned, allows you to see the color contrast of different color combinations and be able to figure out, how do I, does this red and this blue contrast under, which vision types? And it'll show you, how different it is and also whether it passes the AA or AAA spec, both for small fonts and large fonts. And so, if you are a designer and you're picking colors, definitely a tool worth using. Similarly to this, there's a product called Toucan, which is by Avery, that does a very similar thing, so also worth using. Keyboard Navigable JavaScript Widgets is an article on the Mozilla Developer Network about how to improve your JavaScript accessibility. The WAI-ARIA authoring practices, another good resource. Creating accessible interactive web apps using HTML5 is a presentation done at Google I/O last year. Lots of great information in that, especially things related to Chrome. Video captioning on the web is a presentation that was done at Accessibility Camp DC on all the different ways to do captioning, all the different tools out there and options you have for it. Able Gamers Foundation, this is a really cool organization that works to make video games more accessible. Met the guys from that, and they have a setup that allows you to, allows quadriplegics to play a racing game using their face, which people don't often think about driving cars using their face, but it's pretty cool to see it. Worth checking out all the different ways that they're doing accessibility. Building an accessible site from the ground up, another presentation on things to know from the beginning. WAI-ARIA landmark roles. This article talks about the different ways you can set roles for parts of the page to say, this is the banner, and this is the sidebar, this is the content. Just additional markup to really help screen readers understand what is on a page. Mozilla Accessibility is all the different information on Firefox, and if you are developing a Firefox extension, how to make that accessible. You have resources there. Accessibility Camp, these are events that happen around the country and around the world, actually. There were, I think, 9 of them last year, and I think there's been announced a similar number, a couple more this year. I think New York is planning one. DC has a decent-sized one. Boston, Toronto, London. I think Los Angeles is going to be announcing one soon. So plenty of these out there if you're interested. Great events with some amazing accessibility experts, and also generally very cheap and easy to get into, which is nice for conferences. Accessibility is not a checklist. This is in addition to being a good presentation, is a great example of creating a all-inclusive site. So he has a slideshow on there, a video, and then additionally has a transcript of the video, but not a direct translate, but really just a write-up of what is on every slide. And so you can see what he's talking about. And it's definitely worth checking out as well. 2 quotes just to give you guys a little send off. Knowledge of human users and the social context in which systems are expected to operate become integrated into the computer science agenda, even at the earliest stages of research and development. By understanding, the context, by making the tools and the technologies more accessible, you're really opening up a whole lot more. You're creating a culture of acceptance, not a culture of, unacceptance. Finally, and this is from Tim Berners-Lee, who founder of the web. The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. really important thing. So this is me, and thank you. Are there any questions? Yeah.
So when you're looking at the alt tags for your images, should you start it out by saying the logo of the company or photo of and then continue, or should you just write what it is?
You should write it in a way that, so the question was about alt tags.
So like if it's like a decorative element, like this is the background, would you write something like this is the background?
So the question is about alt tags. You know, how do you write good descriptions, specifically also with like decorative images. So for decorative images, a blank alt tag, because you know they're just decorative.
Did you say blank?
Yeah. You know, you don't want it to get in the way. For everything else, it's important for it to just. I tend to be verbose in my writing, so I would say something long, but it's really going to be your personal style that dictates, what you write. But really, you want it to be something that allows people to understand what the image is. And so, saying, if you have a picture, for example, of the Brooklyn Bridge, saying, the Brooklyn Bridge, like, okay, that's not bad. Saying, sunset over the Brooklyn Bridge, taken from the perspective of Manhattan, that's a little more descriptive and gives them a better sense of, what it is. Yeah.
As far as screen readers go, what do you personally suggest as far as testing?
So there's 3 main ones out there. Mac screen reader, which I do most of my development on Macs, and so that's primarily what I use. That said, it's not, Macs aren't necessarily as common, so, that only gets you part of the way there. JAWS is, probably I think it is the most common, and there's many versions of it used with many browsers. It's going to depend a lot on, what you're aiming for. So I would probably say, and the third one is NVIDIA, and that's open source, which is awesome. And so I try to test on Mac Screen Reader along with the latest version of JAWS and the latest version of NVIDIA.
I have a question.
Yep.
Actually, I have 2. One's a question, one's a comment. First, my comment is about the Section 508. That's not the section under the American Disabilities Act, the law. Section 508 is older than the ADA. What you're talking about is rehab.
You're right.
Section 508 is rehab, where the ADA law is not what you're mentioning in your slide. I just want to let you know that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And so I just, wanted to explain the difference. And now, my question is for colorblindness. I'm very aware of people with disabilities. I'm trying to work with everybody with blindness and mobility, but about colorblindness, when you talk about the contrast in colors, can you use 2 style sheets? One for, let's say, for general information, and the other one for specialized for colorblind people? Because to make something so beautiful with colors and design, then to have to alternate it or try to describe it to someone who's colorblind, they may not see all those details. So could I keep what I made in my initial one and then have a special form for someone who's colorblind or okay. So so on the initial one would have all the colors and my original idea, but then on the second one there would be some more description of the colors and the design that's there for colorblind individuals. Would that be a good idea?
Thank you for your question, or your comment, correcting me. And to what you mentioned was that 508 is actually the American Rehabilitation Act, not the American Disabilities Act. I screwed that one up. Sorry about that. The next question was about for color blindness and using two separate style sheets. I would recommend against having two separate style sheets. So first off, there's many different types of color blindness. There's three main ones that will get you many different users, but they are very different. They're some of them confuses reds and greens. Some make it hard to differentiate between darker colors. So a dark green, a dark blue, a purple. Hard to differentiate between those. It comes in so many shapes and styles that doing you'd be hurting yourself. What I would generally recommend is try to stay away from using color as a descriptive. Saying clicking on something red is not as good. Making things stand out for your contrast, I would tend to say no to two style sheets. I think that you have to make sacrifices sometimes with design, and and one of those sacrifices might be that certain users have a hard time using it, and one of those sacrifices might be that you have limited colors that you can use. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to aim for perfect with everything. There's a famous saying that perfect is the enemy of complete. And so it's a lot better to aim to do something good than to aim to do something perfect, because you'll actually finish it. And so I would not use two separate style sheets. Same thing with, or style sheets you can also do, you can do a print style sheet. And so the print style sheet will enable you to have something completely different that generally would be printed, which you're generally going to aiming to people be able to print in black and white or color. And so in that regard, we have that style sheet available. Any other questions?
We're following the same line of the colors and everything. If you were using colors to represent changes when somebody hovers over your link, what happens there? Or what can you do there to help the situation?
So the question is about using color change on hover for links, and what I generally like to do is not just use a color change. An underline, a bottom border, bolding, doing multiple visual cues allows you to, really, include everyone. Additionally, it's common to see like an outline, the dashed outline on focus. That's one way to definitely make sure that you can do the same thing for hover. But multiple hues, so not just color, will really be more inclusive. Any other questions? All right, so as I mentioned, my slides are up on GitHub, and I'll also tweet out a link to them. If anyone else does have any more questions, please feel free to ask me. Thank you, guys.